April 1st, 1942, Lynchburg, Virginia. The world is on fire. The radio waves are filled with static-laced reports of American battleships burning in Pearl Harbor and Nazi tanks rolling across Europe. In the quiet Blue Ridge Mountains, a young man named Desmond Doss stands in front of a recruitment poster. He is 23 years old, skinny, with a gentle face that looks like it belongs in a church choir, not a trench. He works at the Newport News Naval Shipyard, a job that grants him a critical deferment. He doesn't have to go. He could stay home, safe, building the ships that others will die in. But Desmond feels a calling that is louder than the fear gripping the nation. He walks into the recruitment office, his heart pounding, not to kill but to serve. When he returns home to tell his family, the news lands like a grenade. His father, Tom Doss, is a veteran of World War I, a man broken by the trenches of France, who drinks to drown out the screams of dead friends that still echo in his head. Tom grabs a bottle and slams it on the table. "You don't know what you're doing, boy," he shouts, tears welling in his red-rimmed eyes. "War isn't about flags and bands. It's about guts and mud. It's about losing your soul." He points to a framed illustration of the 10 Commandments on the wall, specifically the 6th, "Thou shalt not kill." "How are you going to reconcile that with an M1 Garand?" Desmond looks at his father, his voice trembling but steady. "I won't, Pop. I'm going to be a medic. I'm going to save life, not take it." Desmond arrives at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, for basic training with the 77th Infantry Division. The atmosphere is a shock to his system. It is a factory of aggression. The air smells of diesel, sweat, and gun oil. Thousands of young Americans are being stripped of their individuality, their heads shaved, their names replaced by serial numbers. The drill sergeants are apex predators, circling the fresh meat, screaming instructions designed to break the civilian spirit. The philosophy of the Army is simple: kill or be killed. The rifle is not just a tool, it is an appendage. "This is my rifle," the recruits chant in unison. "There are many like it, but this one is mine." Desmond stands silent in the formation, his lips moving in prayer. The conflict begins on the rifle range. The drill instructor, a tower of muscle and scar tissue, hands Desmond a standard-issue M1 Garand. The wood is polished, the steel is cold. Desmond keeps his hands at his sides. "Sir, I cannot take that," he says. The range goes deathly silent. The birds seem to stop singing. The sergeant blinks, confused. "You can't what, Private?" Desmond explains for the first of 1,000 times that he is a Seventh-day Adventist. He observes the Sabbath on Saturday. He does not eat meat, and he will not touch a gun. The sergeant gets inches from Desmond's face, spittle flying. "You're in the United States Army, boy. We kill Japs. That is what we do. If you ain't gonna shoot, you're just dead weight." From that moment on, Desmond Doss becomes a pariah. To the other men in Company B, he is worse than a nuisance. He is a threat to their survival. These are hardened kids from the streets of Brooklyn, miners from Kentucky, farmers from Kansas. They know that in the jungle, a medic who can't fire back is a liability. Fear turns into hatred. In the mess hall, no one sits with him. When he walks by, they whisper, "Coward, fairy, draft dodger." They trip him in the mud during marches. They hide his boots. They pour water on his bunk. The abuse escalates at night. The barracks are dark, filled with the sounds of snoring and the rustling of nervous men. Desmond kneels beside his cot to read his small Bible, a gift from his wife, Dorothy. It is his only anchor in a hostile world. Suddenly, a heavy boot flies out of the darkness, striking him in the head. "Hey, holy Jesus!" a voice sneers from the shadows. "Why don't you pray for a Section 8 discharge and get the hell out of here?" Desmond doesn't yell back. He picks up the boot, places it neatly by the owner's bunk, wipes the blood from his forehead and finishes his prayer. One night, the blanket party happens. Desmond is pinned down, covered with a wool blanket, and beaten with bars of soap wrapped in towels. The bruises are deep, but the next morning, standing at attention, he refuses to identify his attackers. "I had a rough night's sleep, sir," is all he says. The officers are baffled by his resilience. They assume he is mentally unstable or trying to scheme his way out of service. They convene a meeting to discharge him on psychiatric grounds, a Section 8. A psychiatrist analyzes him, expecting to find a lunatic. Instead, He finds a young man of profound, unshakable clarity. There is nothing wrong with this soldier's mind, the doctor reports. His conviction is genuine. Frustrated, the colonel threatens him with a court-martial for disobeying direct orders to carry a weapon. Desmond stands before the tribunal, a lone private against the brass. "Sir," he says, "I am not refusing to serve. I will march into the fire. I will go where the bullets are thickest. But while others are taking life, I will be saving it. Isn't that what a medic is supposed to do?" Citing the Constitution and his rights as a conscientious objector, he wins. The army cannot kick him out. They are stuck with him. May 1945. The 77th Division is packed onto troop transport ships, headed for the Pacific. The destination is Okinawa, the final stronghold before the invasion of mainland Japan. The mood on the ship is somber. The men sharpen their bayonets, write final letters to their mothers, and gamble away their pay. They look at Desmond Doss sitting alone on a coil of rope, reading his Bible while the ocean swells beneath them. They shake their heads. "That skinny bastard is going to get us all killed," a sergeant mutters. "He won't last 5 minutes on the beach." Doss looks out at the grey horizon. He knows what they think of him. He knows he is walking into the bloodiest battle of the war, armed with nothing but bandages and faith. He feels the fear. He is human after all, but he pushes it down. He remembers the promise he made to God, to never kill, but to never leave a fallen brother behind. As the ship cuts through the waves, moving closer to the Typhoon of Steel, Desmond Doss prepares for his test. The coward is about to go to war. April 1945. The Pacific Ocean. The troop transport ships carrying the 77th Infantry Division are part of an armada so vast it looks like a steel city floating on the water. This is Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa. It is the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War, dwarfing even D-Day in terms of naval firepower. For the men of Company B, the waiting is agony. The air below decks is thick with cigarette smoke, vomit, and the smell of fear. They sharpen their knives until the metal gleams. They check their M1 Garands for the 100th time. And in the corner, Desmond Doss checks his medical bag. Morphine syrettes, bandages, tourniquets, plasma bottles. These are his weapons. The landing is deceptive. Unlike the slaughter of Omaha Beach, the initial landing on Okinawa is eerily quiet. The Japanese strategy has changed. General Ushijima has decided not to fight on the beaches, but to lure the Americans inland into a meat grinder of pre-sighted artillery zones, hidden caves, and fortified ridges. As Doss and his unit march inland, the landscape transforms. Okinawa is not a tropical paradise. It is a nightmare of mud, rotting vegetation, and rain that never seems to stop. The mud sucks the boots off their feet. It smells of sulfur and death before the fighting even begins. The first contact is a shock. A patrol from Company B is moving through a dense thicket when the ground simply erupts. Japanese spider holes, camouflaged pits with lids made of grass and bamboo, open up right next to them. Soldiers who were walking seconds ago are suddenly screaming, dragging shattered legs. The air fills with the crack thump of Nambu machine guns. Panic sets in. "Medic! Medic up!" This is the moment everyone was waiting for. The moment Doss would freeze. The moment the coward would curl into a ball and cry. Instead, Desmond Doss starts running. Not away from the fire, but into it. He sprints through the kill zone, his helmet bouncing, his medical bag slapping against his hip. He dives next to a soldier whose chest has been torn open by shrapnel. Bullets are kicking up dirt inches from Doss's face. He doesn't flinch. He works with calm, practiced hands, sprinkling sulfur powder on the wound, applying a pressure dressing, talking to the wounded man in his soft Virginia drawl. "I got you, buddy. You're gonna be all right. Just breathe." He drags the man 50 yards through the mud to safety, then turns around and runs back for another. The men of Company B watch in stunned silence. The coward is doing the job of 3 men. But these skirmishes are just the prelude. The 77th Division is ordered to relieve the 96th Division, which has been decimated, trying to take a geological monstrosity known as the Maeda Escarpment. The soldiers call it Hacksaw Ridge. As Doss and his unit approach the line, they see the survivors of the 96th coming back. They are not marching, they are stumbling. Their eyes are the 1,000-yard stare, hollow, dead eyes that have seen too much. They are covered in blood that isn't theirs. "Don't go up there," one of them whispers to Doss as he passes. "It's a slaughterhouse. The devil lives on that ridge." When Company B finally sees the objective, their blood runs cold. Hacksaw Ridge is a 400-foot sheer cliff face that rises out of the jungle like a tombstone. It dominates the island. From the top, the Japanese can see everything. To take it, the Americans have to climb a cargo net up the vertical rock face, exposing themselves to enemy fire every inch of the way. And once they get to the top, it's a flat plateau honeycombed with caves, tunnels, and pillboxes. The Japanese are not on the ridge. They are inside it. The captain gathers the men at the base of the cliff. The rain is pouring down, turning the ground into a slurry of red clay. "We go up tomorrow morning," he says. "We take that ridge or we don't go home." The men look at the cliff. They look at the cargo nets hanging down like spiderwebs. They know that hundreds of men have already died trying to hold that plateau. That night, the fear in the foxholes is palpable. Men who used to mock Doss are now cleaning their weapons in silence, hands shaking. Doss moves from foxhole to foxhole. He doesn't preach. He doesn't read the Bible to them unless they ask. He just offers water, checks their feet for trench foot, and listens. "You scared, Doss?" a soldier asks, the same soldier who threw the boot at him in boot camp. Doss looks up at the looming shadow of the cliff. "Yes, I am," he admits, "but the Lord says, 'Fear not, for I am with you.'" The soldier nods, looking at the unarmed medic with a new, grudging respect. "Well," the soldier says, "you better stay close to me up there, Doss, because I ain't planning on dying tomorrow." Morning comes. The naval bombardment begins. Huge shells from battleships offshore slam into the top of the ridge, turning the rock into dust and smoke. The noise is earth-shattering. It feels like the world is ending. Then the whistle blows. "Let's go, up the nets." Doss slings his medical bags over his shoulders. He touches the Bible in his pocket one last time. He grabs the rough hemp of the cargo net and begins to climb. Above him, through the smoke, he can see the flashes of Japanese machine guns waiting. He climbs not to kill, but to heal. The Angel is ascending to the graveyard, May 2nd, 1945, the top of Hacksaw Ridge. As the first soldiers of Company B crested the cargo nets and pulled themselves onto the plateau, they entered a landscape that looked like the surface of the moon, if the moon were made of mud and blood. The naval bombardment had obliterated all vegetation. There were no trees, no grass, just craters, shattered limestone, and the rotting corpses of the American soldiers who had tried to take the ridge days before. The smell was overpowering, a sickly sweet mixture of cordite, sulfur, and decaying flesh that hit the men like a physical blow. For the first few minutes, it was eerily quiet. The Japanese were masters of the reverse slope defense. They waited. They let the Americans group up on the flat ground, let them think they had secured a foothold. Then, the trap snapped shut. Suddenly, the ground seemed to open up. Hidden trapdoors lifted, and Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes mere feet away from the Americans. Machine gun nests concealed in the rock face opened fire. Mortar rounds began to walk across the plateau with terrifying precision. Thump, thump, thump. The air filled with flying shrapnel and red mist. Men were cut in half before they could even raise their rifles. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. In the center of this maelstrom was Desmond Doss. He didn't have a rifle to return fire. He didn't have a hole to hide in. He stood upright in the chaos, looking for the fallen. "Medic! Oh God, my leg! Medic!" The screams were coming from everywhere. Doss sprinted. He ran into the kill zone, weaving through the explosions. He reached a soldier whose arm had been blown off at the elbow. The man was in shock, staring at his stump, screaming. Doss knelt beside him, calm as a statue. He applied a tourniquet, ignoring the bullets that were kicking up dirt into his eyes. "I got you, son, you're going home," he shouted over the roar of the mortars. He dragged the man to the edge of a shell crater, shoved him in, and ran back out. The Japanese snipers prioritized medics. To them, killing a medic was strategic. It demoralized the enemy and ensured the wounded would die. They saw the red cross on Doss's helmet, which he had refused to cover against regulations because he wanted his men to find him. Bullets whizzed past his ears like angry hornets. One bullet smashed into his medical kit, shattering a bottle of plasma, soaking his side in sticky liquid. He checked himself. No blood. He kept moving. Another bullet struck his belt buckle, knocking the wind out of him but failing to penetrate. The men around him were dropping like flies, but Doss seemed to move in a bubble of protection. The fighting devolved into hand-to-hand savagery. Americans used flamethrowers to clear the caves, sending jets of liquid fire into the darkness. The Japanese charged out with bayonets, screaming banzai. Doss saw a Japanese soldier lunge at an American officer, stabbing him in the chest. The officer fired his pistol point-blank. Both men collapsed in a heap. Doss crawled over to them. He checked the American, dead. He paused for a split second over the Japanese soldier, who was gasping his last breath. Doss didn't hate him. He saw the waste. He saw the tragedy. But he had no time to mourn. He heard another cry. "Doss, get over here!" By late afternoon, Company B had taken heavy casualties. The plateau was a stalemate. The Americans held a precarious perimeter near the cliff edge, while the Japanese controlled the caves further back. The ground was littered with the wounded who couldn't be evacuated because the cargo nets were under constant fire. Doss didn't stop. He ran low on bandages, so he ripped up shirts. He ran low on water, so he gave the wounded his own canteen. He was dehydrated, covered in mud and other men's blood, his eyes stinging from the smoke. As night fell, the terror changed shape. The Japanese were famous for night infiltrations. They would crawl on their bellies through the mud, knives in teeth to slit throats in the foxholes. The order went down the line: shoot anything that moves, no questions. But Doss was out there. He was crawling in no man's land, looking for the men who had been left behind in the retreat. He would find a wounded soldier in the dark, whisper the password, and drag him back to the perimeter. A soldier named Smitty, one of the toughest guys in the unit who had called Doss a fairy in boot camp, was hit in the stomach. He lay in the mud, clutching his intestines, crying for his mother. Doss found him. He lay on top of Smitty to shield him from a mortar burst, whispering prayers into his ear. He managed to drag Smitty back to the edge of the cliff. Smitty looked up at Doss, his face pale in the moonlight. "I'm sorry, Doss," he wheezed. "I was wrong about you. You're crazy." Doss just smiled, wiped the sweat from Smitty's forehead and said, "Rest now, brother." Smitty died in his arms a few minutes later. Doss closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and turned back toward the darkness. He wasn't done. May 5th, 1945. The Sabbath. Back in Lynchburg, Virginia, Desmond Doss's family would be sitting in church, singing hymns. On Hacksaw Ridge, the world was ending. The Japanese had waited for the Americans to extend their lines, and then they unleashed hell. It wasn't just a skirmish, it was a tidal wave. Thousands of Japanese soldiers poured out of the caves screaming, "Tenno Haika Banzai! Long live the Emperor!" The sky turned black with mortar smoke, lit only by the terrifying orange glow of flamethrowers and explosions. The American line disintegrated. It was chaos. Officers were screaming, "Retreat! Fall back! Get to the nets!" The men of the 77th Division, battered and out of ammunition, scrambled for the cliff edge. It was a stampede of survival. They slid down the cargo nets, tumbled down the rocks, and jumped into the mud below, desperate to put the sheer cliff wall between them and the demons on the plateau. Within minutes, the top of the ridge belonged to the enemy again, except for one man. Desmond Doss stood at the edge of the cliff. He looked down at the safety of the beach below. He could slide down a rope in 10 seconds and be safe. Then he looked back into the smoke. The plateau was covered in the bodies of his friends, men of Company B who were too badly wounded to run. They were moaning in the mud, calling out for help, while Japanese squads moved through the haze, bayoneting the wounded where they lay. Doss made his choice instantly. He turned his back on safety and walked back into the kill zone. He was the only American left on top of Hacksaw Ridge. He was unarmed. He was surrounded by an entire Japanese battalion. Doss began to work. He moved low, crouching like a crab, using the smoke as cover. He found the first soldier, a man with a shattered leg. He grabbed him by the collar. "Quiet now," Doss whispered. "I'm going to take you home." He dragged the heavy body across the jagged limestone, inch by inch. The artillery was still pounding the ridge. American naval guns were shelling the plateau to stop the Japanese advance, meaning Doss was dodging his own side's fire as well as the enemy's. He reached the edge of the cliff. But how to get them down? The cargo nets had been cut or were too dangerous to use with a wounded man on his back. Doss found a thick rope and a sturdy tree stump near the edge. He remembered a knot he had learned casually in boot camp, a double bowline. It was a loop that could cradle a man's legs and chest. He tied the knot around the wounded soldier. Then, bracing his feet against the mud, wrapping the rope around the stump for friction, he began to lower the man down the 40-foot drop. Doss weighed 145 pounds. The men he was lowering weighed 180, 200 pounds with gear. The physics were impossible. The rope burned his hands raw. His muscles screamed. He lowered the first man until he felt the slack on the line, safe at the bottom. He pulled the rope back up. Then he prayed. It wasn't a long prayer. It was a mantra, a rhythm to keep his heart beating. Lord, please help me get one more. He went back into the smoke. He found another man, blinded by debris. Doss guided him. Follow my voice. He dragged him to the edge, tied the knot, lowered him. The rope dug into his blistered palms, tearing the skin. The blood made the hemp slippery. He wrapped the rope around his arms, his waist, using his whole body as a winch. Lord, please help me get one more. The Japanese were close now. Doss could hear their voices. They were searching the shell craters just yards away. Whenever a flare went up, illuminating the ridge in a ghostly white light, Doss would freeze, playing dead among the corpses. He waited until the darkness returned, then moved again. He was a shadow, a guardian angel moving through a graveyard. He found a soldier who had been shot in the chest. The man was terrified. Don't leave me, Doss, don't leave me. Doss smiled, his face caked in grey ash. I ain't leaving nobody. He dragged him, tied the knot, lowered him. Lord, please help me get one more. Down below, at the base of the cliff, the surviving Americans were stunned. They saw bodies coming down the cliff face, one by one, dangling in the air like puppets. Who the hell is doing that? A sergeant asked. There's nobody left up there. Then they realized. It's Doss. The crazy, conscientious objector is still up there. They started running to the bottom of the cliff to catch the wounded as they touched down. They counted them. 5, 10, 20, 30. The night dragged on for 12 hours. Doss never stopped. He was hallucinating from exhaustion. The world narrowed down to the rope, the mud, and the prayer. Just one more, just one more. A Japanese patrol walked right past him. They saw him, but in the dark they assumed he was just another dead body among the hundreds. Doss held his breath until his lungs burned. When they passed, he stood up and grabbed another wounded American. At one point, he found 2 men together. He couldn't carry both. He couldn't leave one. He dragged them one by one, shuttling back and forth. The rope was soaked red. His uniform was shredded. He had no water. He had no weapon. He had only his God and his stubborn refusal to let his brothers die alone. By dawn, the rope finally went slack for the last time. Doss stood at the edge of the cliff. He looked back at the plateau. It was silent now, except for the distant boom of artillery. He checked the area near the edge. No more living souls nearby. He had cleared the sector. He grabbed the rope himself. His hands were useless claws locked in a spasm of pain. He wrapped the rope around his elbows and slid down, bumping against the rock face. When his boots hit the mud at the bottom, brave soldiers, the ones who had mocked him, the ones who had threatened to kill him, ran forward. They caught him as he collapsed. They looked at him with awe. They looked at the rows of stretchers filling the aid station. The captain approached him, tears in his eyes. Doss, he choked out, do you have any idea how many men you sent down? Doss shook his head weakly, his voice a rasp. Maybe 50. The captain looked at the roster. Desmond, it's nearly 75. You saved 75 men. Desmond Doss closed his eyes. He didn't feel like a hero, he just felt tired, and he realized he had lost his Bible somewhere up on the ridge. May 21st, 1945, 2 weeks after the miracle. Company B was decimated, exhausted and psychologically shattered, but the war didn't stop. They were ordered to assault the Shuri line, another fortified nightmare of caves and tunnels. But something had changed in the unit. The men who had once threatened to shoot Desmond Doss now refused to go into battle without him. Before the assault, the captain, the same officer who had tried to court-martial him, approached Doss. "Desmond," he said, looking at the ground, "the men, they're scared. They won't go up unless you pray for them first." Doss stood before the ragged remnants of Company B. He didn't give a speech. He just bowed his head in the mud and asked God to protect them. The tough, cynicism-hardened soldiers took off their helmets and bowed with him. When Doss said amen, they picked up their rifles and charged. They believed Doss was their lucky charm, their conduit to divine protection. But Doss knew his luck was running on fumes. He was heartsick. During the chaos of the night on the ridge, his small Bible, the one his wife Dorothy had given him, the one that had sustained him through every beating and every battle, had fallen out of his pocket. To him, it felt like losing his armor. The night of May 21st was pitch black. The Americans were dug into shallow foxholes, waiting for the inevitable Japanese counterattack. Doss was in a hole with 2 other soldiers, tending to their blistered feet. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the distinct clink of metal hitting rock. A Japanese grenade landed right in the center of their foxhole. Time seemed to slow down. The other men froze. Doss didn't. Instinctively, he didn't dive away from the grenade. He put his leg out to kick it away or cover it, trying to shield the others from the blast. Boom! The explosion threw Doss into the air. He hit the ground hard. When the dust settled, he looked down. His left leg was a ruin. The shrapnel had shredded the muscles and shattered the bones. Blood was pumping out into the dirt. For the first time in the war, the medic was the patient. But Doss didn't scream. He didn't call for a medic. He knew the other medics were busy, and he didn't want to risk their lives to come get him in the open. So Desmond Doss treated himself. With hands shaking from shock, he tied a tourniquet around his own thigh. He sprinkled sulfur powder into the gaping holes in his flesh. He injected himself with morphine. And then he waited. He lay there for 5 hours in the dark, praying, while the battle raged around him. When dawn broke, stretcher bearers finally reached him. They carefully loaded Doss onto a litter to carry him to safety. As they were moving through the rocky terrain, the group passed another American soldier lying on the ground. The man had taken a heavy hit to the head. He was pale, gasping for air, looking like he wouldn't make it. Doss grabbed the arm of one of the bearers. "Stop," he commanded. "Desmond, you're bleeding out. We gotta go," the bearer argued. "Put me down," Doss insisted. He rolled off the stretcher into the mud. "Take him. He's worse off than me." The bearers looked at each other in disbelief, but they obeyed. They loaded the other soldier and ran for the aid station, leaving Doss behind in the middle of the battlefield. Now alone, crawling on his elbows with a shattered leg, Doss was a sitting duck. A Japanese sniper spotted him. Crack. A bullet slammed into Doss's left arm, shattering the humerus bone. The arm that had dragged 75 men to safety was now useless, flopping by his side. Doss realized he was dying. He had one good arm and one good leg left. He looked around. He saw a discarded M1 Garand rifle lying in the dirt, the weapon he had sworn never to touch. He crawled over to it. He didn't pick it up to fire. He didn't aim it at the sniper. Instead, he used his good hand to jam the rifle stock into the mud and wedged his shattered arm against the barrel. He used the rifle as a splint, tying it to his broken arm with bandages to keep the bone straight. It was the ultimate irony. The only time Desmond Doss ever used a rifle in World War II was to heal himself. With the rifle strapped to his arm, Doss crawled. He crawled 300 yards over jagged rocks, dragging his mangled leg behind him. He crawled through machine gun fire. He crawled until he reached the aid station and collapsed. As they loaded him into the ambulance jeep, he was barely conscious. His uniform was soaked in blood. His face was gray. A sergeant leaned over him. "You made it, Desmond. You're going home." Doss grabbed the sergeant's shirt with his good hand. His eyes were wide with panic. "My Bible," he rasped. "I left my Bible on the ridge." The sergeant looked at the ridge, which was still under heavy mortar fire. "Desmond, forget the book. You're alive." "Please," Doss begged. tears mixing with the grime on his face. Please don't let it stay there. Then he passed out. The war was over for Desmond Doss, but the story wasn't. Because back on the ridge, the men of Company B heard that Doss had lost his Bible, and they decided that they were not leaving this island without it. May 1945. Okinawa was secured, but the cost was astronomical. The 77th Division was preparing to rotate out, leaving behind a landscape of ruin. But before they left, the men of Company B had one final mission. It wasn't ordered by a general, it wasn't strategic, it was personal. Word had spread through the ranks that Desmond Doss, the man who had carried them down the cliffs, the man who had rolled off a stretcher to save a stranger, was devastated by the loss of his Bible. To the men, that cheap, water-damaged paperback wasn't just a book. It was the source of Doss's power. It was the shield that had protected them. So an entire platoon of battle-hardened soldiers, men who just wanted to go home and forget the war, volunteered to go back up to Hacksaw Ridge. They swept the area like a crime scene. They crawled through the mud, turning over rocks, sifting through debris, risking sniper fire in sectors that weren't fully cleared. They weren't looking for Japanese intelligence or weapons. They were looking for a small black book. Hours passed. Finally, a soldier shouted. Half buried in the red clay near the edge of the cliff, where the miracle had happened, was the Bible. It was torn, stained with blood and rain, but it was whole. They wiped it off with the tenderness of a relic. When they mailed it to Doss, who was recovering in a hospital ship bound for the States, he wept. It was the only time the men had ever seen him cry. He held that book to his chest like a long-lost child. It was the message he needed. God hadn't left him. October 12, 1945. The White House. The war was over. The atomic bombs had fallen. The world was trying to rebuild. On the South Lawn, a ceremony was taking place. President Harry S. Truman stood before a line of soldiers. These were the bravest of the brave, the recipients of the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States can bestow. Usually these ceremonies are solemn, but when the name Corporal Desmond T. Doss was called, a murmur went through the crowd. Out came a skinny, shy man, leaning heavily on a cane, his arm still in a sling. He looked small next to the Marines and paratroopers. The citation was read aloud. It took 20 minutes to read. The sheer volume of acts, dragging 75 men, treating the wounded under fire, giving up his stretcher, sounded like fiction. President Truman stepped forward. He held the blue ribbon with the gold star. He looked Doss in the eye. Truman, a man who had been an artillery officer in WWI, knew the smell of death. He knew what courage looked like. He didn't just shake Doss's hand. He held it. "I'm proud of you," Truman said, his voice thick with emotion. "You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." He placed the medal around Doss's neck. The cameras flashed. It was a historic anomaly. A conscientious objector, a man who refused to kill, was receiving the nation's highest award for combat valor. The coward of Fort Jackson was now the greatest hero of the Pacific. But the real story happened after the cameras stopped clicking. Doss returned home to Lynchburg. He didn't capitalize on his fame. He didn't write a book. He didn't run for office. He went back to the mountains. His injuries were severe. The tuberculosis he contracted in the Philippines, later in his service, cost him a lung and 5 ribs. The shattered arm never fully healed. He lived in constant pain. He couldn't work a regular job. Yet, he never complained. He built a small house with his own hands, using mostly one arm, for his wife, Dorothy. He grew his own vegetables. He attended church every Saturday. When Hollywood producers came knocking, offering thousands of dollars for the rights to his story, Doss turned them away. "I don't want to be made into a killer," he said. "If you tell my story, you have to tell the truth. I didn't save those men because I was brave. I saved them because I loved them." Decades passed. Doss grew old. He became deaf. He was almost forgotten by the general public, just a quiet old man in the grocery store who walked with a limp. But in the military community, his name was spoken in whispers of reverence. Medics in training were told the story of the Angel of the Ridge. He became the patron saint of the combat medic. Then, in the early 2000s, a new generation discovered him. A documentary was made, then a feature film, Hacksaw Ridge. Suddenly, the world remembered. But Doss was tired. His body, beaten by the war and disease, was failing. March 23, 2006. Desmond Doss died at the age of 87. As his casket was carried to the grave, it wasn't just family who attended. It was soldiers. Old men with medals on their chests, the survivors of Okinawa, wept openly. Young soldiers who had fought in Iraq and Afghanistan stood at attention. The military gave him a full honor guard. As the 21-gun salute fired, crack, 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 the sound echoed over the hills. It was a fitting tribute. Guns fired in honor of the man who refused to fire a gun. The story of Desmond Doss did not end with the 21-gun salute at his funeral. In fact, his death only solidified a legacy that is unparalleled in the history of warfare. Desmond Doss represents a glitch in the military matrix. Armies are institutions designed to break down individuality and build collective aggression. They rely on the principle that violence is the ultimate solution to conflict. Doss proved the opposite. He proved that one man armed with nothing but conviction could be more effective on a battlefield than a squad of riflemen. Before Doss, the term conscientious objector was synonymous with coward or traitor. In World War I, COs were often imprisoned, beaten, or treated as second-class citizens. They were seen as men who wanted the benefits of freedom without paying the price. Doss changed the definition forever. He forced the US military to create a new mental category, the conscientious cooperator. He showed the brass that a man could hate war but still love his country enough to die for it. Because of him, the path for non-combatants in the military became one of honor, not shame. Today, the U.S. Army Medical Department Museum in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, holds a special place for him. He is the standard. His legacy is most deeply felt among combat medics. In the chaotic hierarchy of the battlefield, the medic holds a sacred status. They are the ones who run toward the scream of medic when everyone else is taking cover. Desmond Doss is the patron saint of this ethos. Every medic who sprints into a kill zone in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria carries a piece of Doss's spirit. The Combat Medic Badge is one of the most respected awards in the Army, and Doss is the ultimate embodiment of what it stands for, service above self. There is also a fascinating Hollywood paradox to his legacy. When Mel Gibson directed the 2016 film Hacksaw Ridge, he actually had to leave out true events because he thought audiences wouldn't believe them. The movie didn't show the moment Doss stepped off the stretcher to let another man take his place. The movie didn't show him crawling 300 yards with a sniper-shattered arm, using a rifle as a splint. The movie didn't show the entire company waiting in the mud for him to find his Bible before the final assault. Reality was too heroic for fiction. The filmmakers worried that if they included these facts, the audience would roll their eyes and say, "That's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was Desmond. But perhaps his greatest legacy is spiritual. In a world that is increasingly cynical, where thoughts and prayers are often dismissed as empty platitudes, Doss showed the tangible power of faith. He didn't use his religion as a shield to hide behind. He used it as an engine to drive him forward. He demonstrated that strength is not physical. The biggest, toughest guys in Company B, the ones who bullied him, cracked under the pressure of Okinawa. They wept. They froze. Doss, the skinny vegetarian who didn't drink or swear, was the iron rod that held them together. He redefined masculinity. He showed that true toughness isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can endure for the sake of others. The Doss paradox challenges every soldier who hears his story. It asks a difficult question. Could I do what he did? It is easy to kill an enemy who is trying to kill you. Instinct takes over. But to walk unarmed into a machine gun nest, to save a man who mocked you? To lower 75 people down a cliff until your hands are shredded meat? That requires a love that transcends survival instinct. As we move toward the final chapter of this project, we must look at the physical remnants of his life. The cliffs of Hacksaw Ridge still stand in Okinawa. They are overgrown with green vegetation now, peaceful and silent. But if you listen closely to the wind blowing off the Pacific, You can almost hear the echo of a prayer that saved a generation. Lord, help me get one more. Today, if you visit the Maeda Escarpment in Okinawa, it is unrecognizable. The mud and the craters are gone. The screams of the dying have been replaced by the sound of wind rustling through tall grass and the distant hum of traffic from the modern city of Uraso. There is a small monument there, a stone marker that tells the story of the battle. But the true monument to Desmond Doss is not made of stone, it is made of flesh and blood. Consider the math of Hacksaw Ridge. Desmond Doss saved approximately 75 men. In the chaos of war, that number is a statistic, but in the reality of life, it is a universe. Those 75 men came down that cliff. They went to hospitals, they healed. They went home to Ohio, to New York, to California. They married sweethearts. They built houses. They had children. Those children had children. If you were to gather the descendants of the men Desmond Doss saved, the sons, daughters, grandsons, and great-granddaughters, who only exist because one skinny medic refused to let go of a rope in 1945, you would fill a stadium. Thousands of people are walking the earth today, breathing air, falling in love, and chasing dreams, unaware that their entire existence hangs on the thread of a single prayer whispered on a bloody ridge 80 years ago. This is the Doss effect. It teaches us that heroism is not isolated. When you save a life, you save a world. When you stand up for your convictions, even when the whole world is mocking you, you change the future. Desmond Doss was not a superhero. He was 5'6". He was frail. He was shy. But he possessed the one weapon that is stronger than atomic bombs: love. Not the soft, romantic kind of love, but the gritty, bloody, self-sacrificial love that looks death in the face and says, "You cannot have him. He is my brother." In the end, the story of the conscientious objector is not really about the war. It is about the peace within the man. While the world around him went mad with killing, Desmond Doss created a sanctuary of mercy in the middle of hell. He proved that you don't have to compromise your soul to survive. You don't have to become a monster to defeat monsters. Imagine for a moment the final reunion, not on Earth, but in the hereafter. Imagine Desmond Doss, free from pain, his arm healed, his lungs clear. And imagine him walking into a great hall. And there, standing in rows, are the men of Company B Smitty, the captain, the soldiers he lowered down the cliff. They are not broken anymore. They are young and strong. And as the medic walks in, they don't throw boots at him, they don't call him a coward. They stand at attention, they salute, and then they embrace him. The war is over, Desmond. You got the last one. You can rest now. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13.